Welcome to episode 2 of the Unnamed podcast with Regal and Swimfan. We now have
Hello.
a not official name, which is that we don't have a name, but it's
That's
enough to do an intro, so that's what's important.
untitled.
Yep. Cool. So today I just wanted to get to what we didn't get to in uh, episode 1 because we were too busy navel gazing,
Hmm.
and talk about speedrunning. But before that, I
Oh,
wanted to talk about Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, which has just come out.
yeah,
Uh, to let's
janky.
say not the best of receptions, for good reason.
Now,
Um,
is
and
it is it like unplayable or is it just a lot of visual bugs?
honestly, I think it's like borderline unplayable. Like the FPS
Hmm.
is extremely bad. I mean,
Oh,
like
right, right.
there are some good reasons why. Well, I don't know if they're good reasons, but like you can make excuses for why this is. But it's not like every Switch game is like this. Not even the last Pokemon games were like this, and in a lot of ways. So
Hmm.
yeah. So I actually would say it's like almost unplayable. I mean, it's obviously playable. Like a lot of streamers are playing it, and people are playing it and having fun, but if it wasn't a Pokemon game, there's no chance that it would it
Be doing
would
so
be
well,
doing anything. Yeah, I mean it's already not doing well, but yeah. So
and it's like consistent, right? Like people are getting low frame
yeah,
rates
yeah,
consistently. Yeah, I mean, I
yeah.
guess it's Switch, right? So,
And there are some things that just can't happen. There's like very low draw distance. I mean, there's technical issues. There's also non-technical issues as well
hmm.
that are a problem. So I'm just curious to, since this is currently happening, to talk about um, from both sides, like how this could happen, why this happened, and in general,
Yeah,
how to get
yeah,
around it.
I can. Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah.
There's generally like this. So one thing I one thing I've learned in working in games is that it is very there are so many moving parts in a game that it's actually really hard to predict how long something is going to take.
Right.
Uh, because you're doing new stuff each time by kind of by definition. And the publishers, on the other hand, so in this case, like Game Freak is the developer, but Nintendo is the publisher,
Yep.
and the publisher is almost always pushing for a release date that is tied into something else or fits with the marketing they've already done in the run up, or just wants to get out before the holidays because that's
Hmm.
always,
Right.
Thanksgiving to Christmas time is
Right.
people buy the most.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, not knowing the details, I would say that this Pokemon game probably, I mean, certainly went out before it should have,
Right.
and I would guess it's because of some like they want to make Q4 financials look better or something like that. But I don't know exactly.
Right. And more generally, what is because the motivation for that isn't necessarily like paying your employees more, right? Is there some
No.
like investor, there's like some kind of investor balance, board balance, something like that that goes on with the
Yeah, and
company?
that's speaking of paying developers. I think like the owned developers by Nintendo may still get paid. Geez, I don't know how they work, but in some cases, in a lot of cases, they want you to launch the game because it means your costs go down again, and you can
Right.
developers, either in some developers they let a lot of people, they find people until the next until the next game.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but sometimes it's just like they don't want to be the spending to be on their balance sheet for that quarter for whatever reason, and it can be as simple as like uh, to make up for another failure that happened. We're going to release this earlier, and we're going to stop spending on it earlier. I feel like I'm not answering your question. What
No,
was your
no, that
question?
totally makes
How'd you
sense.
phrase it?
Yeah, I can see where that comes from. But again, that's those are decisions made. So basically, what you're saying is like sometimes one game is released earlier to sort of make up for a loss in another part of the company, right?
It does happen, yeah,
Yeah.
because if you have if you are a publicly traded company and you have a board of directors,
Right.
yeah, the bottom line always comes first, and that's shitty. It's wrong with our whole system, but but
Well,
that's how it ends up. And the publisher always has the control over the developer, except in very strange circumstances.
really interesting. So was that also like, is Riot one of those strange circumstances, or is Riot also very similar, driven by some board?
I think it's more driven by the developers. Like, there's much more respect for development decisions when it comes to the game. And I think Riot also, like many other companies that experience a huge success, they sort of buy themselves many years where they can kind
Right,
of mess around a little more and not
right,
worry about it. But eventually, yeah, I mean, like everything else, it comes around back to money. So sooner or later, the people who are the executives or whoever or is on the board or making those big decisions is gonna make it. And I don't think uh, most powerful like developers or great developers couldn't really. I don't think can stand up against that and basically kind of have to work with it.
right. I
Riot
see.
isn't the developer by itself because it publishes its own stuff, right?
Right, right, right. Yeah, gotcha.
So there is part of the company that is publishing and part that
But
you call
but
development. But like,
basically,
what do you call the president and CEO? I mean,
yeah,
are
yeah,
they?
that makes sense. Basically, at some point, they're like, you make enough money, you need to create a business arm to manage your money, and then that business arm, whether it's a board of directors, investors, a CEO, a CFO or whatever, becomes sort of makes a lot of decisions based on that bottom line. Right?
Yeah, and they try not to do that. They want, they really did live by the code of being player first, like making
Right.
decisions that benefit the player over small term profit and stuff like that. That said, it's a tug of war. Like
Hmm.
they definitely want to make money, so
Right. Exactly.
I don't think they're making every single decision that would be best for everyone. Like
Right.
that would be giving everyone away everything.
Right. Of course.
But so they're doing that. But yeah, like Rockstar developers, actually that's a good example. Rockstar is such a big money maker. They can throw their weight around, I would imagine. They're still Take Two, aren't they?
I am not sure. Yeah, they are. They're still, their parent company is Take Two.
Okay, yeah. So they have some, but I know they delay constantly and
Right.
get away with it. So I imagine they can do that.
And
Same
so
with like
do
Kojima.
Red, yeah, CD Projekt Red also does, right? And
Oh, dude, yeah,
FromSoft.
yeah. I guess so.
They So that's very interesting. Back to Pokemon. So it seems pretty clear that that's kind of what happened here, given the timing of the release, right? And the timing of the release right before Thanksgiving, Christmas time.
I would
Um,
think so. Do you know when their last mainline
their
Pokemon game
last,
was
so not
released?
mainline, but the last game they released was Pokemon. Their main release was Legends Arceus, and I believe
Mm-hmm.
that was in January this year. Let me double check. Yeah, it was on my birthday actually. It was in January
Mm,
of this year. So it was less than 11 months ago, which
okay.
compared to yeah, which compared to the historical development time is way shorter than anything really. I mean, obviously this has been developing for some time, but I also looked up the size of Game Freak right before we started, and it's 169 people. I don't know if that's
Mm-hmm.
accurate, but it's under, it's in the hundreds, the low hundreds, in any case, which is definitely not large for something of this scale. So
Yeah, that is interesting. Huh.
yeah, so I guess more on this topic. So if when something like this comes down and you have to meet it, and I can also speak to this from a non-game perspective, because this thing happens all the time in engineering as well. This idea that
Mm-hmm.
like the execs want to make something and give you a timeline, and someone has to do it. But what is, I guess, sort of what's the mentality that you feel like you should approach this? Like, do you think?
You mean like as a developer
Yeah,
in
as a
that
developer, because
situation?
I guess one thing is like, people fundamentally, people like, is the industry, basically, I guess it's a roundabout way of asking, like, is the industry like robust enough, that you have the option, if you really don't agree with putting out such a crappy product, to go somewhere else, or is it more just that like most
Hmm.
people are, or the industry is like very competitive, and most people, um, don't, or are cynical about going to different places, or don't feel like it matters, or don't care that they're putting out a bad product that they know is bad.
Right. I would think pretty much any developer cares that they're putting out a bad
Right,
product. Like it's a terrible feeling. Like
right, right,
they don't want to do it for sure.
right.
Uh, but they feel, you get forced basically. There's some companies out there that are much more of the mind that we're gonna, if we're gonna sell games, they're gonna have to be good games. So we got to
Right.
wait until it's done. It's not done until it's done. Uh, which like GTA, I think says that too. Also, I'm trying to think of companies that say have that sort of motto, but some do, and some publishers, whether it's because the developer has leverage over them or because they're just that kind of publisher,
Right.
they will be that way. But by and large, because like you said, competition is such a thing between these massive game companies, they they typically will prioritize the timeline over the quality. Although I'm surprised to see it out of Nintendo, because sometimes Nintendo with their mainline stuff really likes to hold on to it until it's good. So this is kind of surprising. Like,
Yeah,
has
it
it
is.
happened? Can you think of other examples of Nintendo doing
With
this?
Nintendo, not, yeah, now that you mention it, not really with these sort of like super, I don't know what you would call them, uh, these
High
like
profile?
super valuable IPs, right? Like,
Yeah, like they're big tent poles, like
yeah,
like Pokemon and Mario and
Pokemon,
Zelda.
Mario. Like, I can't think of a money grabbing mainline 3D Mario. Like,
No.
even like Mario plus Rabbids or whatever, and like
Oh yeah,
Mario and Sonic
those are pretty good though.
at the Olympics. Yeah, exactly, right? Like Mario plus Sonic at the Olympics would normally be like the poster child for a money grabbing game, but those games were actually pretty good, right? They were at least like high
Oh, were
quality.
they?
I think so.
Oh.
At least they weren't disasters, right? I can't say that
Yeah,
I've played them, but in any case, they
and it's
were
like, and that's like a second tier Mario game, right?
right. Exactly, exactly. So now that you mentioned it, I can't really say that I know of another mainline. So that's actually interesting. So given that that's the case, do you think this actually came from Nintendo? Um, like
I don't
majorly?
see I don't see how it could be any other
Yeah,
way.
but
Who
that's
else
also
would it
true.
be?
Because the thing, so in the previous, in Sword and Shield, I
Uh-huh.
felt very similarly that the game was released before it clearly released before it was done,
Oh, okay.
because, but not to this degree. Like technology wise, it worked fine, but it was very obvious that like halfway through the story just ends, and the content
Uh-huh.
basically just stops and like shuffles you to whatever they had to the end. At one
Cool.
point, there were gym challenges for the first like four gyms, and then for the fifth one or whatever, it was just like our gym's thing is double battles, and then the gym challenges basically they put you in a room and move the camera slightly, and then you just do some double battles. That was the
Oh,
challenge. So
okay.
to
So
me, it was like
it
super
seemed like
obvious
they
that
cut some corners.
yeah, it wasn't even necessarily like cut corners, but they were like on a normal development timeline, and then at that point, someone said, "Hey, we're changing the timeline to release in, a third of the time you originally had planned," and then they just had to ship whatever they had, basically.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. And I'm looking at the the Pokemon release timeline for the major releases, and it looks like they try to do it something big every year, once a year at
Oh, is
least.
that true? Um, was that always the
But there
case?
are gap
Because
years.
I remember the sort of the games people held in high regard, the first six or five gens or so, six gens, in my opinion. Um, oh, oh, I see. Okay, so early on, it was once every 1 or 2 years. But these are mostly like remakes, right? So like half of these are sort of remakes, and the
What do you mean,
mainline
like
game,
gold,
yeah.
yellow,
So
like yellow?
Crystal, yeah, like Yellow, Crystal, Emerald, and then Fire Red Leaf Green. I mean, Fire Red Leaf Green, Heart Gold, Soul Silver. These remakes all require a lot of effort, so I guess they don't really count.
Yeah, because it's a whole new platform too.
Oh, I see. Okay, so this is interesting. So Sword and Shield released 3 years ago, but they never released a sort of remake for Sword and Shield. They just released DLC.
Oh,
And then
maybe they've stopped that pattern. I don't know.
yeah, but so they did release another remake, which is uh BDSP, Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl, and that was
Uh-huh.
last year, and then Legendary was this year. So I guess he
Well,
does.
I'm
I guess go ahead.
I'm looking at this list, and it looks like pretty much everything was released in October or November.
Yeah, I
So
see.
it makes a certain amount of sense that they're trying to shove it out now.
Yeah,
The new one.
it does. It does make sense, but I
It
guess
doesn't
for
make it doesn't make long. It never makes long term sense. Like
right,
it
right,
always
right,
kind of makes short term sense.
right. And I guess
Uh,
that's sort of the cost here. So as a
yeah, like the
if you think
quality
about it
hit.
from yeah from like a long term, like what is the is how much factoring goes into the idea that like you're obviously releasing a crappy product that costs you obviously it costs you a lot of bad press, right, in the short term, but in the long term
Mhm.
it costs you customers because there's a lot of people that like me right here who would have played every Pokemon game that came out because I have the expectation that they're high quality, but once that's eroded, then you lose customers, you lose prestige, I guess, for your fan
Yeah,
base.
and especially on that individual product, word of mouth
Right,
to go down. People will not buy it as much as you would expect. Yeah.
right.
And yeah, it hits the quality. It kind of tarnishes your brand of it.
Exactly.
That said, do remember that Pokemon is a pretty widely played game, and generally, I know it's sort of hard to believe, but like a huge proportion of people who play games do not read gamer press. Period.
Oh yeah.
They just
I
don't do
mean
it.
I also don't read Gamer Press, but
Oh,
for
yeah,
different
but you've
reasons.
heard of. I guess you
Yeah.
get links
Yeah.
in Discord.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's also the question of now. Nowadays you can patch your stuff, right? So how quickly and how effectively are they going to patch, or are they going to be able to patch stuff?
Yeah. That was kind of what their approach with Sword and Shield was. Like my understanding was that Sword and Shield was quite good after some of the DLC came out. That's mostly hearsay. I didn't really take a objective view of it. But
Yeah, and
this
I don't
this is
know.
something.
They remarket their stuff sometimes and like push it again when it's Christmas, and maybe they've made some more changes that have helped it.
Right.
But I don't know. I don't know exactly how Nintendo does their stuff.
But I think that's also an interesting point. There's a if you know who Moist Critical is, Charlie.
Mm.
He's basically like a gaming YouTuber, but he made the argument basically that like in the last well, I'm paraphrasing here, but in the last, I would say maybe 10 years or so, there's been a much higher expectation of like games as when they're released are allowed to be, somewhere between terrible and non-functional or non-functional and terrible. But, that's obviously going to happen because that's all new games and they'll eventually fix it. Uh,
Hmm.
do you agree with that line of thought? Or I guess where do you stand on that line of thinking that like it's okay that it could eventually be fixed, where
Right.
a lot of people
Uh,
also feel like, well, they should fix it before we give them any money.
Bottom line, I mean, putting something out when it's not is shitty, like it is,
Right.
it's shitty to the players and people buying it. Uh, but I know, I know publishers use that as a cudgel that you can, well, we can patch this or whatever.
Right.
Like,
Right.
what's the timeline for? They look at the timeline for. They ask the developer like, all right, well, how long will it take to get it to where you do want it to be? And if we can do that before the holiday, we're fine pushing out it being a little shitty to get
Right.
some
Yeah.
early buys because Pokemon people buy it sight unseen.
Yeah.
Um,
For now, right? That's kind of what I'm pointing out. Like, yes, for now
right?
people will buy it
How much
unfun,
can their
but
brand take?
right, how many games can you like how many basically it's like crying wolf, right? Like, yes, the first time people will still buy it. The second time people might still buy it, but the third time, like, how many good games are you going to have to make if you want to keep this in perpetuity? Which maybe they don't. But
I think they do want to keep it
Right.
like this is
Right.
a huge moneymaker for
Right.
them.
Right.
I'd be surprised if they were intentionally sabotaging it. I think smaller developers and indie games can sometimes get away with it is the wrong word, but like get away with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's
They have the leeway to be like, oh, this is our first game, and we're going to
right.
make it better, and stay tuned. I
Mhm.
mean, I think of like No Man's Sky and how that's
Was that an indie?
widely.
Is that an indie dev? Does that count? No
I'm
Man's
sure
Sky seems like
remember
a AAA game to me.
it does, but let's see.
No Man's Sky. Hello. Okay, maybe it is an indie dev.
No,
26
no,
employees. Wow. That's highly impressive, actually.
yeah. So I mean, it was impressive at launch. It was just kind of problems, and everyone tells me now that it's like a totally different game,
Yeah.
but I haven't gone back.
Interesting. 26 employees. Wow. Okay. I should. So the number of employees thing is really interesting. But I think that makes sense. So smaller, it makes sense that smaller devs definitely are sort of given more leeway, which I think is fair. I guess that also coincides timeline wise with the rise of sort of like Kickstarter games, indie games, things like
Hmm.
that, where
And early
and early
access and stuff,
access,
like
right? And
being a norm
yep,
of
yep,
things, because it reflects how development works much
yep,
better than
yep.
the big day launch or whatever, the movie style launch.
Yeah, that makes sense. And early access definitely should, in most cases, although not doesn't always, should mostly comes with the expectation that like obviously things are not going to work well, right? You're not paying for a finished product. Um,
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's a good new
right.
like state of things, because I think it makes it gives you you can get an early look at what if like your core game idea
Yeah.
is well
Yep.
received, even if all the details aren't there yet.
Yep.
And that's cool. That's good for smaller developers, especially
Hmm.
to have that, because otherwise they wouldn't. Um, One more thing about this Pokemon, I am surprised that Nintendo is let this happen with Pokemon, but it sounds like it's not completely uh, an isolated event with Pokemon. Like sometimes there have been
Yeah.
problems in the game before,
I
like you
think
said.
I think there's been so the most recent example of this I thought it was the last mainline game, Sword and Shield, which I
Hmm.
think was clearly, in my opinion, and I think in most people's opinions, like a very clear downgrade in quality from every previous mainline game. Um, uh, but there, it's the first Switch game. Okay, the Switch can't run some things were very ambitious, whatever, whatever. Um, but this one is a whole nother ballpark. But once in a while, there's a bit of a half finished idea, half baked idea in like a side game. Like I'm thinking of there's this game called Pokemon Conquest, which is like a
Hmm.
tactics spin-off that was like clearly just an experiment. And
Yeah.
but it was fun. I played it, but it definitely lacked a lot of content. For example, right? It was to me, it looked a lot like an experiment that someone came up with that was cool. That the team, they got a small team to work on it, and then at some point, someone came in and said, "Okay, you got to stop working on this," uh,
Yeah,
and
that
they just
sounds
had to
right. I
release.
mean,
Right,
that
right.
sounds very believable. Hey, repeat your sentence because I think I was talking over you.
Oh, yeah. So I was say it seemed clearly like it was something that a group of people, had this idea and were working on it and got it to a state where it was like, playable and releasable, and then someone just stepped in and said, like, you need to stop working on this, right?
Yeah,
Because
it's time to
you,
launch this thing
yeah,
and get back on this other team.
yeah, just launch this thing that no one is going to play anyway, and then get back to work on the main line.
It is surprising because Pokemon is one of their huge like IPs, right? And
Yeah,
I can't think of them Nintendo doing anything like this with Mario or Zelda, like we said, or
right,
like
exactly. Zelda is
Metroid.
another one. Metroid is
Like they
another one,
wouldn't.
right? Like Metroid games are never half baked.
Yeah, they can't be.
But
It's
that's
my
why,
impression. It should
yeah,
be the same for Pokemon,
right.
in
That's
my
why it's
opinion. But I don't know
surprising
why.
because, either like the bad exec or the bad execs are specifically assigned to Pokemon, or
I
there's
mean, it
something
could
else
be.
happening somehow. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe they just don't want to spend as much on these games. I'm not sure
I mean, I
because
guess, but
there's a lot of repetition, right? Like they're very similar games each time.
yes, that's
Yeah.
true. Yeah.
but they do use. Yeah, I don't know. It's a mystery to me.
Yeah, can't tell. Well, I guess we don't, without any more information, we can't really. Oh, actually, no. There's one thing I want to talk about. I want to talk about
Hmm.
company size from a developer perspective. So 100.
Oh.
Well, obviously, my viewpoint is warped because I work at a giant tech company. But a
Hmm.
hundred. So, for example, No Man's Sky or Hello Games says Wikipedia page says they have 26 developers, which is insane to me. I mean, for what?
Developers, not just employees.
Oh, employees. Never mind. Not even
Oh wow.
developers. Yeah,
Okay.
employees. Which is, but that was in 2010. But anyway, that is to me
Oh.
that's uh incredible because if I count the 26 developers next to me, like we do
Hmm.
not. I mean, yes, we do work on something the scale of like at a large scale, but the different things that have to come together within a number of people that small is kind of hard to believe. So from my perspective, and so another example is like Twitter. Uh, a non-technical person just took over Twitter and is now firing a bunch of developers because
Yeah.
there's the idea that well Twitter is just a website with stuff on it. You click a button and it makes more stuff. Like, how much how many do we really need 7,000 employees
How
to do
many of
that?
these people do we really need?
Yeah,
I'll just get
yeah,
rid of most
exactly.
of them.
Yeah, exactly. Which so I think is sometimes valid. Like I think it's a valid idea that there's definitely a lot of bloat. There's a hiring freeze across the tech industry right now because of the economy. That
Hmm.
question is coming up a lot. But I will say that for if I were to take my experience and just look at what it takes to make a game like Pokemon in 2 years. Now the thing is you're not starting from scratch, right? Like you should theoretically already have some kind of engine baseline going. But I would imagine it to take like 300 people to do it in 1 to 2 years, right?
To
That might
make a
be
game like No Man's Sky or Pokemon.
like Pokemon.
Okay.
I can't really speak. I never really played No Man's Sky. I only know a little about it, so I can't really speak to how much stuff that was there. But it was like No
Sure.
Man's Sky is like procedurally generated, right? So
Yep. Yep.
that's also a thing. But to make it in Oklahoma, I would expect it to be like 300 people, not only engineers, but the whole team. So,
Hmm.
um, at the same time, I am interested in the idea of like having like cutting bloat and having a small focused team. But from a development angle, it's surprising that so much can be done by, well, so much can't be done by so few people, as we can see. But that it seems common that that's kind of the expectation going around, which
Yeah,
also
I
makes
mean,
sense because developer salaries are very large. So
oh, are they?
I think relative to all the other positions, yeah, and it's also
Oh, that's
very highly competitive to hire
pretty good.
them because you have to compete with tech companies that have
Right, right.
infinite money.
Yeah, it's a hard job.
I guess one example I can give is hmm, I wonder if I say the product, it will be obvious where it came from, but I
Uh-huh.
can't really think of a
You
good
can
way
say it.
to.
You don't have to name it if you don't want.
All right. So basically, there was. I guess okay. Here's what I'll do. I'll give it in very vague terms, so I can plead ignorance.
Okay.
Uh, so there was at one point there was a big social media boom, right?
Hmm.
And apparent and a lot every company wanted to have its own take on social media, and this was before I was there, but at my company, apparently a directive came down from top level that our company wanted to get in the social media game and you
Hmm.
had 180 days and then at the end of 180 days we would have a fully functional social media product.
Oh, wow.
um, well, you know what company I work at, so
Yeah, I know what you're talking
you
about.
probably know exactly what
I
product I'm
know the
talking
product.
about.
Yeah, I
Yes.
remember.
And this was a big disaster well, it wasn't a huge disaster externally, but it was not a great product, very similar to sort of like a hasty released game.
Yeah,
But
never got a big following.
internally, it was very similar to sort of the things you're describing, where it's like, this comes from up top, and everyone has to be reorganized into this new organization, and everyone hates this new organization, and people are
Hmm.
complaining about having to build a bad product. But hey, the timeline comes from the top, so what can you do? Uh,
So is that so? That timeline sounds fast to me, but
yeah,
is that like a really
or
rushed timeline?
yeah, for something at that scale, it is. It absolutely is because the main concern is not like, for example, like the UI you can do at a hackathon. like UI and stuff like that is not a problem with timeline. The bigger
Hmm.
timeline is for like infrastructure.
Hmm.
So in this case, we are starting from scratch. Right? So that's why with a game, and I can see it like if a lot like if you have a bunch of people that all are all familiar with like whatever engine you're using, like Unreal or Unity or whatever, right? And if you're all familiar with it and you can start with that as a base and you know you can rely on that, I can see it taking faster. In our case, or in a product, in like a tech product's case, a lot of the time you're not starting with existing infrastructure, so you have to build like all these servers and test stability,
Hmm.
make sure things work, and things like that. And a lot of what becomes missing
There's a
in
lot
those
of
cases,
startup costs. So then,
yeah, exactly. Um, and that's kind of what goes into the back end.
uh,
And
I have well, I just have a quick question about that unnamed product. So, was there? Did you know, or did the teams know, or was there even a strategy for how this company was going to win in social media
not
versus the stuff that was already out there? Was it just the like existing player base, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a good question. So obviously I don't know all the details, it's only hearsay, but I
Mm.
don't think so. Not There was obviously at a high level, right? There was this idea, like there was a vision sort of what it would look like and what its purpose would be and how it would integrate with existing products to sort of force people to use it, right? That was kind of the strategy, if you recall.
Yeah, I guess that would be it. Yeah,
Yeah.
like you already have all of these customers or
But you
whatever.
know, like if for something like market research, there was no time for any of that. You know, if you had done market research and actually tried it on your customers, you would have gotten the same feedback that you got when you launched it, which is that this is
Mm.
not a good like this is a very annoying strategy. And yes,
Yeah,
you might get nominal users, but only by forcing them to use it.
yeah, which is never
Yeah.
never really gonna last. That's interesting. That's interesting to hear about. I've always kind of wondered what was the deal with
Yeah.
that.
And
But it's
really
like you
at the
said, there was a social media boom. Like kind of
yeah,
everyone was trying to get in on
yeah,
it, get the money out of it.
yeah. So
And now I wanted to go back a second to the Twitter thing and the Musk takeover. Uh, he, I think he's a great example of. Well, so you mentioned that there are legitimate times where you should go after
yep,
float and tech debt and
yes.
things that are ultimately not doing us any good, that are just
Right.
kind of there. And I agree. Like, of course, like there needs to be a critical eye who knows what they're talking about, looking at that, looking at those problems.
Right.
And I think a guy like Musk, who's just kind of a shoot from the hip, like, how does this feel? I'm going to do it.
Right.
I don't think he knows what the fuck he's doing. Like, he doesn't. He didn't think of two-factor authentication as important to them. So turn this off. Like, he's not. He's making broad decisions. I don't think he's really in the trenches, like trying to understand things, because I think he thinks. I mean, I'm speculating a
No,
lot, but
I think that's definitely accurate.
I,
Yeah.
I expect he doesn't trust the existing teams that were
Right.
there. So I think he's like, well, this is what I'm just going to make these big changes, and this is going to fix it.
I
It
mean,
doesn't seem
this
to be
is,
working so far.
well, yeah. I mean, obviously we'll see, but so there's a
Yeah.
couple interesting points here. So one thing is like, this is what Musk is doing is basically what an entire, I guess, subculture of people would do, right? It's like the people who look at a problem and say, well, obviously the solution is just this,
Hmm.
you know, just allow people to pay for blue check marks. Obviously, only people that care about blue check mark are going to pay for that, right? And there's
Yeah.
a ton of, and these are one of the groups of people I find the most annoying. But sometimes they do have a point. Sometimes we do overthink things, but for the most part, things
Mhm.
that are engineered a certain way are done so for good reason. Right? Like 99 of the 100 times, I would say, you look at a problem and say, well, the obvious solution is just this. Why don't they just do this? Someone has thought of that many times, and
Right. Right.
a
There's
bunch
a
of
good reason.
engineers and product managers got together in the room and argued about it and realized that there are obvious reasons why we can't do it. I think
Yeah, and I
the
I think I think both types of brains need to be on the problem. Like,
yeah, yeah,
I think engineers know their shit, but they also have, in my experience, some kind of limited like flexible thinking.
Oh,
in some
absolutely.
cases.
Yeah, absolutely. Because
And
when
so
you get
some,
too sorry, when you get too deep into the nuance, you get
mhm,
essentially cynical, right? You get cynical because it's like, well, this is a hard problem, and that's also a hard problem. That's also a hard problem. And while that might be
mhm.
true, that kind of gives you a lot of inertia to sort of doing things quickly and moving and innovating and moving haphazardly and having the attitude of like solving problems when they come up rather than in advance.
Yeah, and it's, and, it's a balance, I guess, that we
Mhm.
don't exactly know what's optimal always.
Sometimes you just have to
Uh,
try stuff. It's you just have to
yeah,
do it and see what
and that's
happens.
yeah, and that actually that fits a lot with Riot Games approach. Like they wanted to make sure that they had teams, multiple teams that were developing and iterating and iterating and iterating, like giving them space to make a lot of mistakes and start
Right.
over and start over and start over, with the idea that you're going to come out with a really high quality product at the end of
Right.
that. And I think that I like that. If you can afford to do that, they could afford to do that because League of Legends took off so much.
And I think that's important in a couple ways because sometimes like for example one thing that's coming about work a lot is like this idea of like your value is driven by your impact. This is also happening at Twitter, right? Like you have to sort of prove like essentially basically how much money you made,
Oh,
directly
geez,
or
like put a
indirectly.
number value on your work.
You don't have to do that, but that's sort of indirectly what you're doing, right? It's like, okay, well I made this service X% more stable by doing this, right? That's my impact. That's
Yeah,
um, and when you sort of broadly put broadly put everything like that, you're kind of afraid to do something that doesn't have any impact, like what you just described, right? With just having a team that's literally there to brainstorm and come up with ideas.
right.
And and that is kind of a luxury, obviously. Like if you're paying for early access of a product, right? Or like you're paying for a Patreon of a game that's in development and you are excited to see it come develop, you don't really want to hear the news that like, oh yeah, we spent, the last month trying this thing, but it didn't work. So we have no updates for you this month.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so
It doesn't
that,
feel like any
yeah,
progress.
that is a luxury, but I think it's an important one if you have the means to do it.
And I would think that company you work for has that space as well. I mean,
Oh,
I assume they
absolutely.
have
Yeah.
lots of projects like that.
They do. As with all large, and I'm not outing myself here because all the companies do this. There's a lot of products that come out and then die, right?
Yeah,
Where uh, these companies are known for canceling all kinds of new products all the time, and that's sort of what happens, except at a scale where it reaches market, right? And that's I
mhm.
think that can sometimes
Yeah,
be a
yeah,
problem because now if you reach market, if you don't just do your in-house trial and error and you actually launch the product and have customers and have a contract with the customers and a promise to the customers and then you kill the product, and you do this repeatedly, I don't know. Basically I'm saying what I'm saying is like I don't know that selling the product as part of your experiment is necessarily the best model, but
yeah. I see what you're saying. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Putting putting out something that
Yes.
costs something that's essentially an experiment.
Because
Yeah.
yeah, because then that also, it's no longer like a safe space, right? Now you're beholden to like now, so at a basically a think tank, right? You're not beholden
Hmm.
to your ideas, so you have the freedom to sort of iterate on it and see what happens. When you put it when you put it to market and you put a price tag on it and it fails, then you're kind of beholden to like, well, why, you know couldn't you have done this better and couldn't you have done that better? It's like, well, sometimes that's not necessarily the right attitude to take when you're trying to find something new, but sometimes it is. So
Right, right, right.
I think, well, we have once again taken way more time than I anticipated for this section, but I think it was a very
For
productive
this side thing,
discussion.
I want to
Yeah.
say one more thing,
Okay.
even though
Go
you
for
just
it.
tried
Go
to wrap
for it.
that up. I in my personal experience and a lot of what I read and hear, executives of a lot of companies, a lot of game companies who are in charge of like the publishing, are very out of touch. Like they don't really understand their games necessarily.
Right.
They can understand in broad strokes where what things work and what things don't, but they're not really coming from like the player's perspective. And I
Right.
think that
Or the developer's perspective. Right.
yes, exactly. They don't think
Yeah.
of the developers in sort of regard. Um, that's not true with Riot, by the way. Like the
I
president
see.
and CEO are not on it. Although I think once they got really rich, it changed their way of looking at things a little
Right.
bit.
Right. Right. That's
But
fair.
they at least were their heart was in the right place. I think.
Right. And I think
Whereas like
that's
a Bobby Kotick is not. He doesn't give a shit about anyone who works for him. He wants to make sure he's making money every quarter.
right. Right.
And
And,
so if it means another Call of Duty, we're putting out another fucking Call of Duty.
well, they did that too. I mean, the newest Call of Duty has similar problems, I'm told. Um, but yeah, that's actually interesting. I mean, that is sort of what you expect, but I think that's also reflected in Riot's products, right? Whatever you think about their game philosophy, like it's consistent, and I think that you can definitely clearly see that in Riot's products, right?
Mm-hmm.
Riot is one of those like FromSoft, CD Projekt Red types where they, at least recently, they've only released games when they feel like they're done, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of, and Blizzard
Yeah,
used
and
to be like
I
that
mean,
once upon a time.
Valorant is doing well, right? Valorant.
I don't know how well it's doing, but I can't imagine that it's doing badly. I think it's at the
And
very least quite popular.
that's a good that kind of tactical CS:GO shooter. I think is a really good space for them to get into because
It seems
for
right
all
up.
of CS. Hmm?
I was gonna say it just seems right up their alley, given League of Legends, right?
Yeah, yeah, like team based tactical stuff. Or what do you
And
mean?
also their competitor. Yeah, that is what I mean. And also now their competitor is Overwatch 2, so that's
Right.
on one hand you have Valorant, on the other hand you have Overwatch 2, and I think it's pretty obvious um, the sort of executive philosophies that went into each of those releases, right?
Yeah, yeah. Is Valorant kind of the more gamers game, like more of a hardcore
It's a
than
good
Overwatch? I
question.
haven't
I
thought
think
about it in
so.
years.
So I know Valorant is more based off CS:GO than Overwatch,
Yeah.
and I would imagine that it, as a result of that, it's more it's like more difficult basically without across multiple metrics where you can measure difficulty. So I think that's definitely true, but I honestly don't know enough to give you much more detail than that. That's
Yeah, I would think on the like spectrum of easy to learn, hard to master stuff. Like I
right,
think they push for the hard to master
right,
details in there that
right,
maybe Overwatch smooths out. But
right.
I don't
Yeah,
know. I don't know enough quite about it to say.
same.
But Valorant,
Uh,
yeah, they were working on that for years and years and years in different versions, and
Actually, I'm
they would.
curious how many, if you were to estimate, how many people were actually working on that? Okay, wait, let me
I
give you
mean,
my guess
early.
before you tell me. Hold on.
Okay.
If you were to say you had to release Valorant in 5 years,
Hmm.
5 years is too many, like 3 years. Yeah, obviously not counting delays. Like if you were to just build a team to release actual Valorant 3 years from now, I would guess. Let me think. I would guess like 200 total people, maybe like 80 devs, somewhere between 80 to 120 devs, and like 20 designers, and the rest like marketing, infrastructure, or whatever.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that sounds reasonable to me. You're asking me a question I'm not necessarily going to be
Oh,
able
I
to
see.
answer well.
Okay,
Because of the exact numbers of developers, I'm much more like I know how many marketing people were on it, but
I see.
and it always ramps up, right? It always
Yeah,
starts very
yeah,
small with a really core group of people, like putting out proof of concepts, essentially,
yeah.
that these ideas work, and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and near the end, you add marketing and stuff like that. But from what I understand, like they had teams in the different little buildings at the campus at Riot, and I was going to guess 150 were
Okay,
working on like Valorant when I left, and that was like really shortly before they launched. Um, and depending on the success of the game, I bet
right.
it can double even. So, and I don't
Oh,
know.
that's very interesting. I would expect the number to go down after it launches because or at least the
In
texture of
certain
the team's
places,
going to be
yes.
different. Right. Yeah,
Yeah,
that makes sense.
the makeup of the teams will be different.
Right. Yeah. Because that's very very soon into the process you stop needing like environment designers or whatever, right? Like environmental engineers or whatever, because
Yeah, if
in
you're not
theory,
making if you're
in
not
theory
making
the environments
maps.
are still there, right? Yeah. And you're mostly then you're focused on like adding content to the existing system.
Yeah, and so you need artists and engineers and
Yeah. And,
designers for all that stuff.
and like writers, right, for new
Yeah,
content.
writers.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. All right. Good
And they
talk.
do a lot of research too.
Oh, like I
Ads
want to talk about
people.
market research. I'm very interested in. Have you ever done?
Okay.
I know you have because we talked about it once.
Yeah.
I'm very interested in how the sort of things you can do through market research and
Well,
uh,
that's a whole topic. Should
how you can
we
learn
should
it.
we talk
Yeah.
about that
Well,
now, or
we'll
go through the
let's
other
save
things
it. Let's save
first?
it for the future. I'll put it in the
We should add it to the list.
yeah. But what's on the list for today is
Uh-huh.
speedrunning, and we can get through
I know.
this pretty quickly, I imagine.
I mean, I got time. Whatever.
Yeah. So you are a speedrunner. You have a
Yeah,
you have a time on speedruns.com, right?
I do. I have many
You have many
times.
times. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I guess first of all, just very generally, what do you speedrun and for
Yeah.
how long?
I've been speed running some games from my youth. So they're old uh, adventure games by Sierra Online. Games like King's Quest and Space Quest you may have heard of,
You
but
did,
possibly not.
yeah. Well, I had not heard of
uh,
them before I met you, but you also did mention them last time. So
yeah, so they were like big in the late '80s and early '90s, basically. So if you weren't around then, you might have heard of them because they died big time. Like
right,
people, they didn't have a broad appeal because it's a lot of one, it's a lot of like reading and narrative stuff, and
right,
another, it's a lot of puzzle solving. And on top of that puzzle solving, it was usually done by a small group who may have very esoteric ideas of what constitutes a puzzle and a solution.
right,
So it was sort of a known thing that sometimes there were puzzles in the game that were like, how the hell was I supposed to figure that out? And
right,
this was before you could go to GameFAQs or whatever,
right.
So
Before the internet.
but they'd have their hint line that cost money. So one could argue, like, are they making them obtuse puzzles on purpose so they can get more hint line calls?
Right.
Maybe. I don't know. Who knows? But anyway, they also had a huge competitor in LucasArts games. So games like Monkey Island, Grim Fandango. I don't know. They were also adventure games,
Oh, I played Grim
and
Fandango.
they were generally more popular, and I would say just better. They're better
Right,
quality games.
right,
They look a little better, they work a little better, and they're less frustrating generally.
right.
But something I like about the Sierra games in particular, and the one I run the most of is called Quest for Glory.
Right.
Quest for Glory 1 through 5. There's 5 of them,
Mm-hmm.
and that game was a sort of a hybrid adventure game and RPG. So unlike every other Sierra adventure game, you have stats. You have stats that grow depending on what you do. Like the more you do of something, the more it goes up. So if you go sit around climbing trees all day, you'll get your climbing skill up, that kind of thing. Uh, and because it has stats on top of the regular like dialogue and puzzles and things like that, it makes for interesting speed runs because you're trying to go as fast as possible, and you can kind of set the balance of your starting stats, and figuring out what the ideal optimal stats are is a big part of it. But yeah, I play the Quest for Glory games, and yeah, they were games I played as a kid, and this sort of goes to the sort of the big reason behind people who speed run at all. I definitely believe, yes, it's about competition, but it's also about, I want to keep playing the games
Right.
that I've played 1,000 times and don't have anything else to do with,
Right.
because I love this fucking game. Like
Right.
whether it reminds me of playing games with my dad, or I just feel really good at it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I want to play this more than the developers have given me a way to do. So
Right.
I'm gonna race in it now.
And early on in speedrunning, a lot of that happened. Like people sort of started speedrunning because of that, right? At the
Yeah,
very
I think
very beginning.
so. And it's like games you already own too.
Yep.
So there's this like any game can be a speed run. You can go back all the way to whatever. And I guess I haven't seen a Atari 2600 speed runs, but
They
there
probably
are
exist.
NES speed runs.
Yeah, they probably
Yeah, I should
exist.
look them up. I just don't know. Yeah,
Um,
old runs of Pac-Man and shit.
so for you, how did you? Because you didn't get into speedrunning until like fairly recently, right? How did you first get into it,
Yeah, uh,
or
it
get
was
into
really
doing it? I should say.
yeah, it was really as simple as every I don't know 5-10 years I replay these games or some of
Right.
them just because I like them. And the most recent time I did, when did I say I want to like try to run this? Yeah, you know what it was. I was replaying the games, and I already had an interest in watching speedrun marathons. So like
Right.
games done quick and
Mhm.
that sort of thing. And there was, and so at the time I was like, I just for the first time thought, oh, are there speed runs of this game or these games? And I just, performed an internet search to find that there were not a lot of them because it's kind of got to be like a 40-year-old guy to
Right.
not just guy, got to be a 40-year-old person to want to play these games in particular. But I looked at the speed runs and I was like, oh, this is really interesting to me because it shows a bunch of like tricks and shortcuts that I had no idea existed.
Right.
And looking at it, I'm like, I think I can do this. I think like I'd like to try to do this. Because when I look at the speedrunners of games I'm not as good at, I'm like, oh, I could never be this good, right? Like if I look at Super Mario 3D game players, I'm like, I don't think I could ever make my hands move that way.
Right.
But with a game, I'm just like, I don't mind playing this game again and again and again and like sort of hanging out in it.
Mhm.
It just seems much more achievable because I haven't even considered any other types of games to speedrun.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
For me personally, I like to play a game that is it's I don't know how else to say it, but fun to hang out in. Like
Yep.
the
I
the
get that.
the atmosphere of the game is something I'm okay being in a lot. Whereas like a game, like if I were to play a horror game, I would never be able to.
Well,
Personally,
have you
I would
ever
never want
watched?
to speedrun it.
Have you ever watched horror game speedruns?
Yes, I like watching them and not playing them.
I think it's kind of funny because a lot of them are extremely broken. I'm thinking
Yes,
especially of Amnesia. They are so broken that you kind of skip all the horror parts of it for the
totally.
vast majority of the game, but I get what you mean. Yeah, I see what you
But yeah, like sort of short circuits what they were trying to do with the horror stuff, and
mean.
it sort of looks funny as a
Yeah.
result. Yeah, that stuff is fun, but like if I'm even if that's true and I'm playing Resident Evil
Right. Right.
6 or whatever, and I'm
Yeah.
standing at the kitchen table with all the dead bodies and the
Yeah.
maggots or whatever,
I get what you mean.
it's
For
just
sure.
different strokes for different folks. Like some
Yeah.
people love that stuff. So, but Quest for Glory, like there's always fun and colorful characters. Like it's a funny game,
Mhm.
and it's most of it takes place during the day in pretty locations. So it's kind of fun to hang out in for me.
That's pretty funny. So for me, I did briefly look into doing a speed run.
Oh yeah.
There's relatively few games that fit into the category you just described, which is games that I replay frequently and I have really fond memories of playing in the past.
Mm-hmm.
There's basically only like a couple of them. The one I looked into most seriously was Final Fantasy Tactics Advance.
Mm-hmm.
I found there's no community as when I checked anyway, and I found it, but there were some runs that people had done, but the game just could not be a good speed run based on some
What
basic parameters.
based on what?
Basically, because there's a lot of grinding involved because it's a tactics RPG.
Yeah, you gotta spend
So
time leveling up.
you're kind of expected to be at certain levels. There are tricks to get around it, but even the tricks require a lot of grinding. It's like a 4 hour run, and like an hour of it is just doing nothing. So there's a couple. So Golden Sun is another one. I know Golden Sun has like quite a strong community these days,
Oh, is
but
that so?
but but for me, a lot of it is that when I like the things I want to do in the game are not necessarily conducive to speedrunning. So for me, I almost want to play it, like if I were going to speedrun a game, I would speedrun a game that I had fun speedrunning, and if I want to play a game that I had a lot of fun in, I would want to just play the game um sort of at my own pace, if that makes sense.
Just
So for
replay it
me,
how you want to do it.
yeah, like how I want to do it. I want to do like, so for example, I'm interested in doing like challenges or like randomizers or other kind of like similar runs, but not
Oh
necessarily
yeah,
not
that's a whole
necessarily
other thing
going
we can talk about.
as fast as possible. Just because if I really enjoy the game, I usually, for me at least, it's usually because I did it, or like there were some things I really wanted to do, right? That like I
Mhm.
wanted to specifically use like this class or this character because I thought it was fun or cool. And
Right, right.
so I don't, because speedrunning, the idea of going fast is the main metric, can conflict with a lot of that. I never, doing them never really appealed to me. But I do really like watching
That makes
speedruns.
sense. I mean, that makes
Um,
a lot of sense. Like, it's just not how you want to. If
right,
it's not how you enjoy a game, it doesn't make a lot of
right.
sense.
And I think a lot of that is also with the types of games that I played a lot. Like JRPGs and tactics games kind of fall into this category, like, right? Because a lot of that is like customizing your character and making what you think is the coolest character. And in
Hmm.
JRPG speedruns, a lot of that is making the optimal character, which is usually something broken that has a single repeatable strategy, right?
Yeah, it's true.
Um, and that kind of conflicts with kind of like what drew me into playing like character creating games in the first place. Whereas on the other hand, for a game like for like a platformer or a 3D platformer, or I assume for an adventure game, going as fast as possible is totally fine. It's like um, it's sort of in line with what you would already be doing if you're playing the game anyway.
Yeah, and there's exceptions to that. Like, there's
Right,
side stuff you can do that may not fit into the speed run.
right,
But this reminds me of the topic of categories in speedrunning. Because you're right, by and large, like it's all about the one metric, time. But you can also, depending on who you are and what the community is like, you can set any kind of. I mean, it still uses time, but you can set any kind of goal. Like, I want to play as this specific character and beat the game, or I want to play as this specific group with this specific setup and see how fast I can do that, and then other people can run against that.
in Pokemon speedruns, this is still pretty rare, but one of my favorite categories of speedruns is like they have, for example, like Squirtle percent or Sentient percent
Yeah,
or Pidgey
yeah,
percent.
exactly.
And those are very interesting because yeah, another thing for me is like I'm much more interested in the routing rather than the performance. Right, it's really cool to sort of come up with strategies and see what strategies people come up with through their knowledge of the game, and the actual grinding for the runs is less interesting. But on
Yeah,
the
and you got
sim,
to be a certain kind of mindset to be. You got to be a certain kind of person to even want to be able to like grind stuff like that. Like
yeah, for sure.
just replaying the same thing with minor variations. I
Especially
get
if
why
there's a
that's
lot of
not for
RNG
everybody.
involved. Yeah, um,
Yeah. Oh, RNG is another topic too.
yeah, for sure.
It adds
So,
spice.
you, just like me, I'm sure. I think you've already mentioned that you got into speedrunning, or like you learned about watching speedrunning way before you started doing it. What were some
Yes.
of the like? What was like the earliest times you saw it? What was like the some memorable early runs that you remember?
Yeah. There's gosh, it's been I can't remember how many years it's been since I started watching. Do you know when these things even started being
S- uh,
widely available?
Yeah, I guess I can go first. Since
Okay.
I sort of
Yeah.
remember. So in 20, so I'm pretty sure I started watching like 20, somewhere between like 2012 and 2014. I'm pretty sure it was
Mhm.
2013, but this is when like Twitch first got like really big, and when I was watching a lot of like I would just spend a lot of time just on Twitch, like browsing their channels. And I found games done quick during that time, or maybe someone sent it to me. But for me,
Mhm.
and this was like, if you go back to the VODs from these years, they're like fairly janky. But there's a couple
Yeah,
runs that I thought were really funny. There's one, Barkley Shut Up and Jam Gaiden.
sure, I've
Um,
heard of that. Yeah,
yeah, so
that's like an indie game, sort of,
it's like,
right?
yeah, it's
Or
like an indie RPG maker game. But there was this one
yeah.
run that I think is fairly well known where the devs for the game showed up at the run in sunglasses and sat on the couch behind the runner. It was, it was quite
Just
funny
by
at
like,
the time.
it was a surprise drop in.
I don't think it was surprise. I don't think I think it was planned, but
Okay,
they were all there, and they didn't really offer like dev commentary. They mostly made jokes, so it was
that's
a good time.
interesting. I've seen a couple of things like that. I'm actually surprised they don't bring in developers more often to some of these streams. Like, I would be surprised if there weren't developers who think speedrunning is really cool and want to like talk about their game, but they don't do it a lot either.
GDQ has I've seen a couple of them on GDQ, but yeah, nowadays whenever I checked in, I think it's like somewhat common. The thing is, it's usually indie devs, right? Because a lot of the times, if you're speedrunning like a well-known game or a game with a developer, like sometimes they're not authorized to come and speak or whatever, or you get like
Yeah,
a
that's true,
marketing
especially about
person.
like things that are broken.
Yeah, exactly. Which is unfortunate. I don't think that is necessarily helpful to anybody, but I can definitely see
No.
that being the case. And then for me, a second
Yeah.
one was this. I think it was. I think it's like it's one of these games with a name that's like shuffled from the list of 5 English words that was available to translators at the time. I think it's like Secret
Okay.
of Mana,
Oh yeah,
uh,
Secret of Mana. I love that game.
Secret of Mana, Legend of Mana, something. Anyway,
Oh,
it was
Legend of
not.
Mana is the one of the sequels.
Now I want to look at them and find it, but
Do you
I
know
don't
what
think.
platform it's on?
No. Well, I'll see if I can find it while you're talking at some point. But
Okay.
anyway, there's this. It was the first time I kind of found like it was like a game breaking glitch early on in the game that you grinded for like a short amount of time and it made you invulnerable.
Hmm.
It
You
was
found it?
no, I didn't find it.
Oh,
The run
okay.
showed it off basically.
Got it.
That was great. Yeah. What about you?
I think another huge point of why I stuck with speedrunning, I know it is because there's a community there, and I'm hanging out on Discord already, and a bunch of these people are on Discord all the time. So and they just will talk about trivial minutia about these games that only people like us would even be interested in, but I am. So the fact that there's people talking about it and posting their runs and setting up live races together, like all that stuff really made me stick with it. Like if there wasn't the Discord community around it, I probably wouldn't have gone as hard. Uh,
I think that's honestly a big part of a lot of like when you try to make a game, and this is what I want to get to, the idea of like how can you make a game that sort of captures the speedrunning appeal, is that
mhm.
having a community there is really important. Like I would
Yeah.
not
Oh yeah.
still be playing Lost Ark if I didn't have a bunch of friends that still play Lost Ark that I wanted to hang out with.
You know, it's worth mentioning that you do play a lot of like uh, upkeep games, right? Like
Yes,
MMO type games and
yes.
gacha games. Am I giving you away by saying gacha games?
No. That's totally I think we mentioned it already.
So
Last time,
you,
but yeah,
you're
I do
you're
play.
cool with some level of repetition, but in a different sort of
Yeah.
environment, like you're hanging out with your friends. I guess.
Well, in general, I'm okay with repetition as a concept. Like I want the games I play to go on forever,
Right.
and
I
that
see.
can take. And I have a whole idea built around this. It's not nothing that, but like there's a couple ways to sort of make it go forever. Like one type of game that can go on forever is like chess or basketball. Like the
Hmm.
individual game will end, but it's fun. Like the game can start over, and then you can play it again the next day.
Yeah, matches are interesting each,
Right.
each
And
time
yeah,
in
there's
their way.
changes, right? And there's changes based on in those cases your opponent, but sort of
Mhm.
similarly like roguelikes are kind of the same category. So but without an opponent or with a computer opponent. But yeah, anyway, I like games that go on forever. Like I don't like it when the games I play end. Which is why
Yeah, and that's a big difference too. Like at least with the stuff I run, it's like I'm turning a single player game into a multiplayer game,
exactly.
and a game that's 20 hours into hundreds of hours.
And that's
And
sort
yeah,
of
it's squeezing more out of the games
Mhm.
you already love.
and that's sort of what you described at the beginning, right? The idea that like you want to spend more, like you already did everything there's to do in this game, but you want to somehow get more out of it, and that's when
Yeah.
speedrunning, randomizers, and that come. By the way, I found the game I'm talking about. It's actually Secret of Evermore.
Oh, Secret of Evermore. Oh,
Yeah,
okay. That's another one. I never played that one, but I know it.
I let's see. Does this
Isn't that
say
an
what?
SNES game? Yeah.
I don't know if this says what platform is on. I'm sure Wikipedia can tell me, but
It's Super Nintendo.
Super. Okay, that would have been my guess. It definitely looks like a Super Nintendo game. But yeah,
I
there's
don't
some
know why I never played this. There's some reason I didn't, because it's like completely right up my alley. I just don't know why I
interesting.
never
Maybe
played
it
it.
was hard to get. I had definitely never heard of it. So.
Yeah, maybe it was a. Yeah, maybe it was.
By the way, do you have on a related topic? Do you have a favorite speed run that you like
Oh, right.
for
We
whatever
were we were
reason?
talking about like
Yeah.
when I got into speedrunning, like what stuff caught my eye. I mean, generally, it's stuff that the stuff that I initially liked the most was old games that I played as a kid that were very hard and I
Right.
had never seen done well. And it's sort of a cool, like, whoa, I had no idea this could even be played that way.
Right.
And it's sort of that comparing to my memories of the game. And then on the other hand, seeing the very new games, like the new games that I am playing. Again, like usually it's games I've played or am playing that will find the run interesting. But like Super Mario 3D games, I think are really cool because there's this high level of skill,
Right.
and it's like constant motion. It's just interesting to watch. Uh, so that one of those stands out for me is the. I was watching a Super Mario Sunshine race,
Oh, I love
and
Sunshine.
Sunshine's great for speedrunning,
Yeah.
and it was just really really cool. I just remember watching the whole thing for however many hours it was, and thinking it was really great. Uh, and liking the
I
idea of racing in it too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Sunshine is a better speed run than Mario 64. That's
Yeah, I
my
think you
hot
may be
take of
right.
the day. Oh,
That's just
you're
what
on
you're
you're on
able
board.
to do.
This is our first hot take.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not here to. I can't argue. I mean,
um,
they both have great things about them for sure, but I
oh
think just
yeah.
the weird addition of the water stuff
Yes, the water is I think
makes
is
it
super
interesting.
cool. Yeah. For me,
And
yeah.
it was a little harder too. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
I mean, I believe you. I don't know that I can't. I don't even know how I begin to measure whether it's harder, but I can believe it for sure. For me, I like a lot of so for normal speedruns, a couple like the sort of 3D platformers are kind of what I started watching. I wouldn't say that I really like them now. Like I used to watch like Jack and Daxter and stuff like that.
Uh, did you
Um,
used to play that game?
Banjo 2. I didn't. So I honestly I
Really?
never
Oh.
really played. So yeah, like I mentioned, the of the games I used to play, I when I first got into speedrunning, I couldn't really find most of them, to be honest. I also didn't play that many games, but like there were some
Mm.
esoteric Game Boy Advance games that made it. I watched Pokemon. I guess that's probably the main one. Like I'm still a big fan of Pokemon speedruns. I watch
What's cool about Pokemon speedruns? Because I have failed to get into them.
So I should pair. I watched normal Pokemon speedruns for a little bit.
Uh-huh.
I would say they're not that cool. I don't really watch them, but what I watch actually is Pokemon Randomizers. I think
Ah,
Randomizers
okay,
are
okay.
very cool. And I also watch sort of esoteric categories like Catch 'em All is interesting because you're no longer taking one Pokemon from the beginning to the end.
To
You're
get everybody.
yeah, you're now essentially you're like routing like money and catching locations, things like that.
Hmm.
But that category is also depending on the gen, like 10 hours at minimum usually after Gen
Wow.
1. So not necessarily for everyone. But I did watch a lot of Pokemon, like actual Pokemon runs in the beginning. Just because just because I knew what it was. But I do think it is kind of boring after a while if you're not interested in the technical side because
Hmm.
you're basically just taking one Pokemon through the whole game. And there's not really much variance in what you do other than having certain points of RNG that you
Right, right. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
But
But the
some of my
randomizers are
the randomizers are really cool. And then some. Oh, there's a couple games. A Link to the Past is a game I played as a kid which has a speedrun I really like, just because it's like
I've watched some of those a few times.
nice
I
to
like
watch.
those as well.
It also has a randomizer, which I'm a big fan of.
Yeah, that and the Super Metroid randomizer and the crossover randomizer.
There's a cool. That is also cool. But my favorite speedrun is actually a game called Lagoon. I really like GDQ. Not a huge fan of GDQ at this point, but GDQ has at least still has this block. It's smaller than it used to be, called the what was it? Is it Shitty Games Done Quick? I believe. They probably made that
like the
family
quote-unquote
friendly.
bad games.
Yeah, they probably made it family friendly at some point. But Lagoon is I believe it's also a Super Nintendo game.
Yes, it is. I'm looking at it right now.
That has a really funny speedrun. It's very broken.
Did you never played this game?
No, I never played this game. I didn't have any consoles growing up, so
right, yeah,
right.
But also, this was 91, so you'd have
this was before. So this is before my time. Yeah, I was 0. Yeah, I was not even.
So what do you like about it?
I just think it's funny. Like, it's so broken that it's really funny to watch, because the things, like, it is very hard because it's so broken. And sort of, if you watch the run with commentary, PJ Dicesar, if you know who that is,
no,
had a run. I can send it to you. I think you'll like it. That kind of explains like how incredibly broken the game is, but it's a funny crossover because the brokenness of the game also makes it very hard. For example, the camera doesn't, like, as a very basic example, the camera doesn't scroll properly. So normally, you stand in the center of the screen. As you move, the camera scrolls. But in this game, it doesn't work. So it doesn't scroll until you're like basically almost to the edge. So you can't see where you're going at all, including during fights. So there's just a lot of stuff like that makes this very entertaining.
Yeah, that is another interesting thing that comes up with these marathons. Is there's a ton of just obscure games that.
Right.
I mean, I've been playing games all my life and like obsessed with them, and I still don't know them all. There's a ton of stuff that I've never even heard of, especially if it's like Japanese only. There's a lot of those gems out there.
Yeah. I mean, the game you speedrun falls into that category too, right? For most people, me included. So.
Yeah, that's true. It is obscure. It's really obscure, and it's funny because people in the community do speedruns. They enter marathons and they get in marathons pretty consistently, and it's always kind of fun to watch people watch these games because most people it's before their time for sure.
Yeah,
and they've never heard of it because it's never been promoted in any other context. And it's also weird, like these early games, you're literally, I mean, the adventure game idea of like you type to say what you're going to do, like you say look tree or whatever, open box, or cast this spell or whatever. And it's sort of, it feels a little more open-ended than modern games do because of like you can do way more than like the sky's the limit, even though it's not.
Even though it's not, right? Yeah. But it is pretty funny. One of the fun, I watched one of these videos on one of the games of speedrun. The synonyms thing I think is hilarious.
Oh yeah, there's an interest. Yeah, because there's a bunch of different ways of saying a word that are programmed in.
I forget. There was one funny example. I'm sure there's tons of funny examples, but just the way, I think it was like, instead of punch human, you can like hand man or something.
Yeah,
or like something to that extent. I think is hilarious.
Yeah, there's like a when you like are going to show something to somebody, you can say just like wet man, and it gets what you're trying to say. And I'm trying to think of funny ones in Quest for Glory, but there's a lot of like obscure synonyms sometimes where where it doesn't quite make sense sometimes, but it's just the game understands it. And then there's weird stuff with those parsers where they leave in a weird synonym. For example, like in the wizard run of Quest for Glory 2, you enter like this wizard academy, and they're like, why are you here? What's the reason you're here? And one of the reasons you can type is magic. Just, I'm here for magic. But they didn't program it in quite right, so you can also just write mag. You can just say MAG, and they're like, great, and you come on in. And so there's like weird, and then there's one thing where you're escaping from a dungeon. You're supposed to write like search for loose brick or something like that, or
Right.
search for exit. And you can just write, instead of search, you can write seek. And you can just write seek I, just the letter I, and your guy will run around and find the exit. And we have no idea why that is. But there's just little eccentricities like that I find very fun with the. It feels like you can stumble across the little things by making typos, because you can.
Right.
That's fun.
That reminds me of another thing actually, which is engineers are actually very interested in speedruns.
Oh,
Not people that didn't even necessarily play the games, but people that like sort of decompiling the game essentially, or like reverse engineering the game, I guess is a better way of putting it. Where you can try to figure out like how it was implemented and what kind of loopholes they left in the code. I know I have a lot of friends at work who may not even be interested in games, but are interested in that kind of aspect of speedrunning. The idea that like you're trying to figure out how the system works and kind of break it from the other side. Yeah.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. The Sierra game community has a lot of technically minded people in it, and they've created a couple of programs that let us essentially just look directly at the code of the games.
Yep.
So there's a certain amount of people who speedrun that are sort of the tech wizards at it. Like if I looked at the code, I wouldn't be able to tell you what anything was. Like I don't get it. But they know how to like pour through the code and figure out, how this exact room is programmed. And through that, they found a lot of strategies for breaking rooms and scripts that they never would have found otherwise, like stuff I would have never even thought of. Like esoteric ways of manipulating the time system in the game that you'd never be able to figure out without looking at the code itself. So
for sure.
So there's a big contingent of speedrunners that rings true for me. That are into it for that reason. In fact, there's a group of people on there that do not speedrun. They only do that. They only break through the game and find tricks, but they have no interest in themselves in running it.
That definitely checks out. Because honestly, a lot of people get into engineering because they like that kind of thing. Like many people in like high school years or formative years get access, who have means, get access to like a computer and can mess around with like basically hacking stuff, right? Like trying to get into trying to get into your teacher's email or whatever. And a lot of that that carries over. You can do it in a more legal and unpaid, unfortunately.
Did you ever see War Games?
The movie? No, I didn't.
Yeah, I mean it's again before your time, but it was something I watched as a kid. But it has like the dream of computer hacking as being a kid in it, because he can connect to the computers at his school and literally change his own grades and stuff like that.
Right.
And so that was always in my head when like trying to do that kind of thing.
Hollywood hacking is a lot different from real life hacking is more like what your speedrunner friends do. You just kind of sit in a room and you like print stuff out and you kind of look at it, and then once in a while you're like, oh, this is cool.
Try crazy stuff.
But it is possible to get into teacher's email and change your own grades. One person in my grade in high school got suspended for doing that. So
they get caught, huh?
Yeah, they did get caught. So it does.
I mean that's the problem. Like, how can you do it in a way they don't notice?
Well, if they don't notice, they don't notice. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And there's a lot of kids out there. I mean, I definitely turned in a paper or two that did not have the middle pages actually contain any content.
I see. That's pretty good. See, except for when I procrastinated too hard, I was always the kid that wrote way too much. Like if you actually got me to work on something, I would always have to trim. The problem is that I usually didn't work on it at all. So
that was
not a good balance.
Yeah. I definitely I was always a slow writer, and I just dragged my feet on it. I was always like double spacing, triple spacing to try to fit it into the
understandable. Anyway, back on topic, we have that reminds me of this other thing I want to talk about, which is what kind of other reasons do you see that kind of bring people to your community? So we have probably the biggest ones, which is like people are interested technically, and people are interested because of nostalgia. Do you see people that come in just because they want to compete in something, or like just because they wanted to speedrun and this looked interesting, or just because they think the idea of just like playing a random game and going up the leaderboard is fun?
Yes, there is a. It's probably a minority. It's a minority, but it's a significant portion of the people who play that are people who had never heard of the game and like are not 40-year-olds like the rest of us,
Right.
and are like saw this game and was like it blew their mind because it was just like nothing they'd ever seen because
Right.
it's different than a lot of modern games, and they were brought in by one of us doing a speed run in a marathon where they saw it and they were like, I want to try this. So there are those people who are just like, this looks like a crazy weird game that I've never heard of. I want to try it out. It looks fun. I don't know that it's novel to them, you know.
Right.
But that's kind of the main people. Like we do get a lot of people who see the speedruns, and there's also a guy in the community, One Short Eye, who you've heard of, who makes videos about
Right.
adventure game speedruns that are basically explainers trying to break it down for people who don't know the game.
Right.
And they're really fun. A lot of people who haven't even heard of these games have watched these videos and come by and been like, I thought the video was really cool. I heard that you had a community here, so he kind of is our like biggest marketing help.
I mean, his videos are doing very well, right? So
yeah, they do. I mean, surprisingly well for what it's about.
Honestly, the speedrun explainer videos are like there's not that many of them, but the ones that are made high quality, no matter what the topics, seem to always do very well.
And I mean, they're definitely interesting to me. It seems like there's going to just be more and more of those, right?
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of them myself.
Yeah,
like I think
they're cool.
I think Tomato Anus does some. Bismuth is another one that does some.
So yeah, I watched his Portal explainer. Or was it Portal 2 explainer?
Yeah,
Portal
that was a recent one.
Yeah. I think maybe you pointed me to it, but it was interesting. It was. I mean, that game is when you have a 3D movement game, it adds like another level of complication.
Portal is just super. I mean, Portal. If I could watch it without throwing up, it is a super. It's like a mind-bending speedrun almost.
Oh yeah, do you get motion sick from first person?
I do,
stuff?
Yeah, from first person. Yeah. I mean, Portal, I think is honestly, I think at some point I said Minecraft is the worst one. No, Portal is the worst one. Portal is
because it flips you upside down and all that stuff.
Yeah. Portal is just immediate death. Minecraft is also bad.
What one? Minecraft?
Yeah, Minecraft is. I don't know. I don't even know why it is for Minecraft. I think it's mostly the dim areas that are the problem.
Huh? What? Why would that be?
I couldn't tell you, but my experience with Minecraft generally is that like if I watch it for more than like 8 minutes, I get very motion sick.
Did you ever play the game Mirror's Edge?
No, but I watched the speedrun. Tomato Anus has a explainer on Mirror's Edge, actually.
That's probably a fun speedrun.
Yeah.
You should watch. But yeah, that's a famous for motion sickness.
Motion sickness? I see.
Yeah. Because you do like flips and rolls and stuff and wall running in first person.
So when people join the community, do you first of all, like I imagine that there's not that much, like most people come into Discord and say hi and maybe even try something, but most of them don't stick around, right? Is that
most people just bounce off pretty quick.
And that makes sense. That's pretty much true for any community, to be honest. Unless you're looking for established
trying
people.
stuff out.
So that's fine. What kind of red flags do you see? Not necessarily red flags, but when can you what are some things that kind of tell you that this person maybe, I wouldn't even say isn't here for the right reason, but isn't here for a reason that would lead them to actually enjoy what they're doing here.
Yeah, or like this person's going to be a problem because they.
Sure. Well, hopefully there's not too many of those. I mean, most of the time that's like interpersonal, right? Like if they're just kind of an asshole, then it is whatever. That's true anywhere. But
yeah, I mean, So this community in particular, because it's not that big, like maybe the longest speedrun.com leaderboard is like 10 people deep. Like it's
Right.
no, it's not like Super Mario games or anything like
Right.
that. So it's a pretty tight knit community, and they also are not that. Well, they make specific rules. Like they have specific rules, but they also are usually on the side of like, we're gonna make this fair, but we're gonna make it more as fun as it can be.
Right.
We're not gonna make rules that maybe like 100th of a second more fair, but it makes the game way less fun
Right.
or whatever.
Right. Exactly.
So occasionally we get people in that either totally disagree with that point of view, or find something else wrong with the way we do things. So for example, there's a real example of this one guy who came in, and he was watching the speed runs that we had and that we were posting, and he was finding all these new tricks and things, and was really into the games and really like helping us already. But he had this thing where he was like, I don't think we should allow any times on the leaderboard if you didn't record it, didn't live stream it. Like if you didn't live stream and have people in the room watching you, it shouldn't be accepted. And he was really like willing to go to the mat for this idea. And we were like, no, it's like some people just want to stream off, just want to do it offline because it's an added layer of pressure to have people there. Or it's just like, I don't want to stream all the time because I can't. There's a lot of reasons why you might not do that and still be legitimate. And it's also like, it's like, games with 5 people on the leaderboard. Do you really think these guys are coming in here and like finding elaborate ways to cheat so they can be at the top of this pile?
Right.
I find it hard to believe.
Right.
So there was a guy like that just kept really hammering at that idea that was like just not going to be accepted. And yeah, he eventually sort of bounced out because everyone was like, no, we're not going to do that.
Right.
And then there's also the people that actually, when I think about it, those are the only 2 people I can think of that have red flags. Like people who come in and are like, we want to do something so much more competitive that it's going to make it not fun.
Right.
And I don't agree with how you do things, and we're going to change things right away, kind of thing.
The Elon Musk of the world, if
the Musks of the world,
right?
And then also the people who it's just not a personality fit; they're just like assholes, they're racist or whatever.
That's fair. But that's actually interesting. So do you think people come in with like reasonable expectations of what the game is going to involve? I mean, I guess if you watch it on speedrun, if you watch it in a marathon, you would come in with that expectation.
Yeah, I don't think I can't think of anyone who would come in not having either played the game or seen the speedrun. Like, how would they?
That's fair.
That even work?
That's actually a good point.
So yeah, it's usually those 2 types of people, like someone who played it a lot as a kid or played one of them as a kid,
right,
is back, or someone who just saw something for the first time.
And I guess going off of a similar idea, and I guess this doesn't really apply to the Quest for Glory games, but in general, if there was a big change in that kind of required, well, I guess I'll ask the precursor question first, which is how much of a draw do you think it is to the people that are competitive or like close to or like kind of competitive adjacent, that sort of the point of speedrunning a lot of the time is that things don't change, right? Like the game is still the same and there's not going to be a new patch, for example, that kind of changes what you have to do.
I think that's another type of layer, but it's a huge portion of speedrunners have got to be like, I want to be super competitive, right? Like I want to try to climb the leaderboards, and I don't want a game that changes on the way.
Right.
On the other hand, there are people that really prefer games that are new and changed because they can show off how quick they are to adapt, basically. But generally, people want it to stay the same,
right?
If it's consistent, right?
A lot of the ways.
I got to imagine there's a ton of super competitive people. It's not necessarily why I'm there, but I think it's probably a lot, right?
I don't know. I guess, I mean, I have not been in these communities, but I imagine it's probably a lot. Although competitive in the speedrun is probably different than, like, for example, there's a lot of competitive, like, you play League of Legends, you're competitive on
Mhm.
some level, right? If you play ranked at least or whatever. So I imagine it's not exactly the same, but there's a little bit of competitiveness in most of us, I would imagine.
So this reminds me because seeing someone else break your record is motivating. Like I could get my best PB possible, but if someone else beats it, I know I can do better. Like I know I can go back and play it again. So that competitive element is a driver for even for people like me as well. It's because it just has this sort of community vibe. Like I one up you, you one up me, and oh, this reminds me because a big part of at least this community, and as I understand it, most game communities, uh, sharing strategies is expected. Like keeping tricks to yourself or how to accomplish tricks to yourself is usually looked down upon. It's more about how well do you execute that stuff in a live performance. And sometimes if you have people come in who don't want to give that stuff away, that's also usually a problem too. They don't necessarily get the
Interesting.
acceptance of the community because they're like, no, I'm not going to tell you how I did that. You got to figure it out. Which I get that perspective, but I happen to like it the other way more because you get to the fastest absolute times
Yeah,
by everyone sharing. So
that's really interesting. I never really thought
and
about that, but that makes sense. Like I always just assumed that everyone just shared the strategies. That's kind of the point. But that's actually
yeah, some
super
people don't.
interesting.
Some people don't like
Some
that
people don't, huh?
aspect because it's a competitive thing. It's like
Right,
I want to
right.
be the best. Like I
I
get it.
get that, but that's very interesting.
Yeah,
But the
and
community as a whole. So I guess this is my perspective. But do you think like sharing strategies makes the experience more fun? I think that's
absolutely. Like
absolutely
if I
true, right?
found
Yeah.
something, I
hmm
am absolutely excited to share it with everybody. Like,
So it's kind of funny because this is sort of that makes if you think about it from a design perspective, speedrunning is kind of like is both cooperative and competitive at the same time, right?
yeah, for
Like
sure.
there is kind of a meta, like in the actual single run it's competitive, but there is a meta or is a community, or there's like a, if you imagine like it's kind of like writing a guide in for another game, right? Like if you become really good at something, you there's sort of this benefit or this urge or this kind of cooperative spirit within the community that like
Hmm.
I share my knowledge so that everyone can get better, so that for whatever benefit. And in this case, the benefit is that so everyone can kind of continue to work towards the same goal. Right? There's a
Yeah, it's
community
a
building
feeling that
aspect.
we're all
hmm
even though we're doing things individually, we're all pushing towards a similar goal, right?
Yeah,
Pushing the game as far as we can. And when I came in last year and a half ago, I
Mhm.
started this. There were plenty other generations of people who you're building on their work,
right,
like
right.
stuff that was discovered years ago that I didn't know about as a kid. I'm like, okay, I learn all these things as they have been, and then I'm going to go look for new stuff myself. So, and actually that's something I want to bring up too. There is a certain, I guess that's similar to the programming savvy guys, but there's a certain subset of people that just want to poke at the game and try to break
Mhm.
it and
Yep.
share those things, but not actually do the runs themselves, right? So they'll play the game and try to go out of bounds and find things that are just wacky because they like that search
If you think
and the
about it,
payoff.
yeah, if you think about it, it's like or it's like if you think about the whole speedrunning experience as a game, it's like you can play, it gives you options for what you can do with your time to still contribute to the game such a community. It's like you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
actually perform the run, which is also helpful because it, you get into, if you only think about it from a community perspective, first of all, it gives you personal achievement, but you
Hmm.
can help promote the game, right? If you're really good at the run by getting into marathons or whatever, and kind of setting a time, which is sort of the end goal. But if you don't want to do that, the community still gives you a lot of ways you can contribute and have fun and be a part of it, um, through just doing
And
all
you're
the other stuff on
creating
the side.
even just doing a speed run and recording it and
hmm
posting it. You're making content for the
Right.
community. Like
hmm
even if it's not the fastest run, people still watch each other's runs and look for either things they can give advice on or look for like just little things that different players do that never comes up in a longer run that you can use to improve your own. For
Right.
example, like I'm not the number one. I'm not the number one guy on those boards. Like
Mhm.
there are 2 or 3 guys that are just insane. Like they're so fast. I'm just never going to be able to move my hands that fast.
Right.
Uh, and that's fine. Like I'm going to do as well as I can. But there's those guys, and then there are guys like me who I post my stuff, but occasionally like even the best people will say, "Hey, I was watching your run, and I noticed you do this specific screen with the keyboard a little differently, and I'm going to pick that up." And that's fun too. Like even if you didn't even know you were doing something that was better than the agreed upon route.
Right. Yeah, that's super interesting. What else?
Should we
What
talk about
happens?
a little
Oh,
bit? Well, I was just saying maybe we should spend a little time at some point talking about randomizers and.
oh, I was thinking we should save it just because I feel like we can
Oh,
talk about
okay.
randomizers for a long time.
Yeah, and I guess it's been 2 hours already.
Yeah, because I'm super interested. I mean, randomizers are I think a great way to sort of reuse existing infrastructure. Right. In fact, I
Oh yeah.
think this. I guess it can be a preview. I think the owners of the IP should make randomizers.
Yeah, I was
I don't
about to
think
say the same thing.
I don't think they ever will for whatever reason. The execs don't think you can
I
sell it or anything. But
I wouldn't necessarily count that out. I think
okay,
I would think there will be companies that make randomizers for their games or include it as an included feature.
yeah.
Like
I
I
mean
would not be surprised if that becomes a thing.
that would be great. Uh, you know, there are some potential issues, but I think that I don't see any reason why you shouldn't do that, given how popular they are and among
Yeah, and it's
developers.
like you
But,
can say like, hey, this is not the intended experience.
right,
Like this is for people who've already played the game for the most part.
right.
But yeah, I mean, a developer-made randomizer would be pretty cool if they could plan it from the beginning and sort of build around that.
Hmm.
Being able to do
Assuming
that.
it's not just a total cash grab with no features, but it's what
I
it
mean,
is.
there's that possibility too.
Yeah. Hey man, you can't
Uh,
don't let perfect be the enemy of good or whatever.
right. And speaking of randomizers, they did make someone in the community made a randomizer for Quest for Glory 1
Oh, interesting.
recently.
Okay.
That is, it's not a game that like lends itself to randomizers
Right.
in an obvious way, but basically he made it every place that you acquire an item, and items are a big thing in these games. You carry around a lot of stuff. Every time you acquire an item, it is a random item from the game. So it basically changes the locations of every drop essentially.
Interesting.
And he also adds in logic so that you can still win the game
Right.
with wherever it drops. So you can't have things, mission critical stuff that's hidden behind a wall you can't
Mhm.
pass.
Mhm.
And it's really interesting. It's really fun.
That's it actually sounds like a pretty good fit given the whole like puzzle unlocking kind of thing. So
Yeah, like the puzzles are the same, but you've got to think of them in a different way because you don't have the same set of items you've
oh, I
picked up.
see. I see.
And
Interesting.
like
Okay.
and there are like advanced ways to get to an item pickup area
I
that
see.
wouldn't normally be possible, but if you're a speedrunner and you know how it works, you can get there. And it's
Right.
not and that's like the way you have to go in this case. Like get a dagger or whatever, like something you start with nothing. And sometimes the simple weapon that you need to even fight is hidden in a really tough place, but you have the skills to get there if you do it often.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, that would be cool. I do think we could talk for a long time about randomizers and what
Yeah,
would come into
well,
one would.
yeah, let's set
So
that aside for the next time.
but on the last thing I want to talk about is just what kind of games do you think? So I have some ideas actually. So if I were to imagine a game that was trying to like target what speedrun communities and speedruns do well,
Mm-hmm.
I think the cooperative portion is pretty important. But I think it's very interesting that there is both a cooperative and a competitive element within the same group, right?
Yeah, I guess there always is, right? With
Uh,
games?
I mean, maybe, but so for example, League of Legends, right? You have not many people are incentivized to make guides or anything. I mean, within your small group, like let's say, like most people, I imagine you just play with your friends.
Mhm.
You're not really incentivized to be a part of a community, really. Right? Like, I
Yeah,
feel like
you want your tactics to be kept to your own team, right?
yeah, but even broader than that, like there's no real reason, like there's not really anything that a community is building up towards. Right? Like in speedrunning,
Okay.
there's this idea that like, okay, you're in a group and we're all working for the shared goal, and it's very clear what this goal is. In League of Legends, it's not. There's not really such a goal, right? Like, yes, if you're really interested in joining a community, like you can go to your school, your university club or whatever. Right? You can talk strategy,
Mhm.
but there's not really like this base need or this base benefit of doing that. Like most people, it's sort of made so that most people can just play when you want to and then not play, and you can come back to it the next time and it will sort of be like you're not really trying to advance the community, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's not some frontier that you're on the
Right.
team.
Right. Sort of sort of the developer is the one that's kind of in charge of all of that, right? Like through patches, the developer is the one that's trying to like, how can we make this better? How can we make this faster? And at the very top, when you reach the very, very top level, that does exist. Like there's like Discord. Oh, so for fighting games, for example, right?
Fighting games. Yeah.
There's like Discords that dedicated to a character, right? All the people that play this character and like it go into Discord and they sort of work together to kind of advance what you can do and share setups and combos and whatever.
Oh, okay.
But
Yeah.
I think in a lot of games, for example, in League of Legends, unless you're at such a level, or unless you're trying to learn something, like you're trying to pick up a new champion,
Hmm.
there's no real pull. There's no like natural pull for you to do that. If that makes sense. And the same is true for like single player games are all the way like they're not competitive and they don't have this at all, right? Like if you're just playing a story like a Breath of the Wild, unless you
Yeah.
had some external motivation, there's no real reason for you to talk about like how to play the game with anyone or like how to play the game better with anyone. The whole point is kind of that
Yeah,
you're
like
you're just in there trying to experience. Yeah.
you'd share like your progress and like interesting experiences you have, but it's not like a shared thing in the same way.
Right. And kind of the point of that is like you share because it's fun. You're just talking to someone, but there's no ulterior motive to sharing. There's no sort
Hmm.
of like sharing does not benefit this group in some way. Uh, so I think
Right.
yeah. So I think it's an interesting idea to explore. I mean, it's hard to imagine what. So one idea I have is like if you've ever played a card game like Slay the Spire, for example,
Uh
like a
huh. Yeah.
roguelike deck builder. You could sort of get this by having that kind of roguelike experience, but with a group, right? So instead of you building your own deck, somehow when you make decisions, you are making decisions that affect the whole group in some way. So the simplest form is like uh, when you make when you pick a card, it goes into your group's pool, not just your own pool, for example.
All right, like team drafting or whatever.
Like team drafting, right? Something like that, where and that doesn't really quite. You're not really in that state. You're not really competing against each other, which I think is okay. But I think it is an interesting idea to sort of target the idea that like you are somehow getting better. I guess the simplest way to put it is like getting better at for yourself also makes your community better. Right. That's kind of the thing with speedrunning, which is
Right.
like
Well, I mean, are you talking about? I mean, in a broad sense, yeah. Like, but I mean, in this specific example, are you talking? Is that different from like games that are literally co-op? Like,
that's a good question.
you,
I think it's different in one sense, which is that in co-op, the cooperative portion of speedruns is not the individual time, right? The
mhm.
cooperative idea of a speedrun is like the it benefits it's like outside of the individual run. Like if in one run you find a new trick or a time save, um, you do better in that one run, but the larger benefit is that it makes the entire community better, right? Over
Yeah,
time. It's like
everybody gets to make their run
yeah,
a bit better.
and I think the difference is like it's like another way to put it is like it's long term rather than short term, right? It's like
Yeah. Okay.
any improvements you make have a long term. I guess the term would be like sticky or whatever. The idea that
Mhm.
like a permanent unlock, right? Like when you do something, you suddenly have a permanent unlock for your whole community that gets better. And at the same time, there's also a competitive element of, you start over. This thing doesn't necessarily um, stay forever or whatever, but it's like you start over with every run, and you can sort of build on it as you go.
Yeah, and you bring up another interesting thing about speedrunning is that when you find a skip, especially if it's significant, the whole leaderboard is blown up,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like it's all the records are like kind of up for grabs then. So um, if the best people in your community are working on another game, you can you can spend some time at the
Right,
top of the leaderboard, which is
right,
nice.
exactly.
Which I have done, and then get knocked down later.
Well, hey, you got your screenshot, and
Yeah,
that's all that
old
really
gold
matters.
trophy.
Yeah.
Uh,
Uh, One of the other things is the idea of it being competitive. So another difference with co-op games is, again, once you're done playing the co-op game, you don't. I guess I'm mostly thinking of puzzle games, but like you're not really incentivized to play it again, right? There's no sort of replayability because
yeah, no
the point is that you have
variation.
a cooperative experience, right? And then you have the experience, you solve the puzzles once. The challenges are kind of presented to you to be solved once, basically. That's my impression of a lot of co-op games. Maybe I'm only thinking of like a
Yeah, what
specific
kind of game are
class.
you thinking of?
I'm thinking
Because
of like It Takes Two or whatever, Portal.
I
Okay, so maybe there's more. So what else are you thinking of actually? There's probably a lot more that I'm not thinking of.
that are that kind of game.
Or that are anything you would call co-op. Like what else? I guess Lost Ark,
Oh man,
MMOs are
yeah, I
co-op.
mean MMOs are, yeah, they're generally co-op as well. I mean, yeah, you're for sure if you're playing on a team
Yeah,
fighting the AI or fighting another team, yeah.
right. And I guess
Uh,
I guess MMOs actually fit into what I'm describing fairly well, where it's like if you're in a guild or
Cooperative
whatever,
and competitive.
and you have a specific challenge, like you're kind of incentivized to share with your team, and you can also, instead of sharing information, you can also share, in addition to sharing information, I would say you can also share resources, right?
Yeah,
That are
yeah.
sort of driven that way. So MMOs are pretty good actually. For an example, so like in WoW, for example, there's a lot, like in a guild, there's a lot of planning around like, so like when you kill a boss, you can only kill a boss usually once a week or whatever. It'll drop a
Mhm.
random item, and then you have a raid leader or a guild leader that sort of like moves the items around to different members of the party, right, based on
Yeah,
needs or whatever. So that is actually
right. The
very
party,
similar.
the leader can distribute them.
Yeah.
Man, remember the old days, or is it first come first serve with drops?
Well, first come first serve was a long time ago, but I think they honestly removed that. I think to a big firestorm at some point in WoW, and it was only like rolling as or individual. Like you only get individual drops, and there's no more funneling of stuff around.
Yeah, I mean, makes some sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I just remember like was it Diablo 2 games and things would drop? You'd be
Oh,
clicking
yeah.
like crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
You were asking me about speed runs I really liked watching,
Mm.
and I actually do like watching the old JRPGs. Like Final Fantasy VI was a really interesting run
Oh, yeah. I
to
like that.
watch.
Mhm.
Some of the like epic games that I've played before, Chrono Trigger, I really like to
Yep.
watch. That's fun. Um, anyway, I just wanted to mention those.
Yeah.
And
That's.
Undertale is kind of fun to watch too.
Oh, I don't know that I've seen Undertale Speedrun, but I know it's quite
You're into that
popular.
kitty shit.
I see. I see.
Undertale's great. It's a great game, but it's also like really sincere in a way that is cringy for a lot of people, I think.
Oh, I don't know if that would affect me, but I
Okay.
feel like I would enjoy Undertale because um I like sort of like meme meta joke type of games,
It's
but
not quite like anything else, and it is. I think it's legitimately funny, and it also
right,
the base gameplay is like bullet hell.
right.
Is in the fights you move around and
Hmm,
avoid
hmm.
stuff. Which is why my wife could never play the game.
I see.
I cannot do this.
Unfortunate.
Boy, and it's a perfect game for me because I love that kind of gameplay.
Bullet hell?
And the last thing I'll say is another nice thing about speedruns that are long is that they're good for just like having on while you're doing other things.
Mm.
I don't know how
Yep,
much you're a person like that,
I
but
do all of that. That is,
okay. I think it's pretty common these days.
yeah.
Uh, never being alone in a room quietly so you can think.
Right. Well, that is a problem, but you know, we do the best we can with what we have, I guess.
But I mean, I used to leave the TV on all the time
Yeah, same.
at home, and I don't do that anymore.
Even
But
starting as a kid.
now it's Twitch.
I had a recording of the TV version, straight to TV version of Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. And I would just like play that on replay for pretty much like half my childhood.
Wow, Attack of the Clones. So why
Yeah.
not 1 or 3?
That's the only one I had recorded. So
I
just like they showed it on TV one time and I recorded it, or like my mom recorded or something, and I just replayed that. That was a VCR tape.
Yeah.
That
We had a lot of
tape.
those too.
Yeah. So
like we recorded a ton of. I think we had the original trilogy on VHS that was recorded. Had all the old 80s commercials in it and stuff.
Yep. I had I can remember a lot of the commercials from that.
Yeah, no
from
doubt.
that recording. Yeah. All right, we're close to 2 hours.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you want an example? There was like a Snickers. There's this like old dad rock song. I think it's the Who. It's like one way or another.
Sure, yeah.
I'm gonna get. I don't. Before my time, but anyway, that played in like a Snickers commercial, and I
just remember that.
Remember like 30 seconds of that song like very vividly.
I think that's Blondie. Maybe it was a cover.
Couldn't tell you. Maybe it was a cover because it is a commercial, so I guess they're like lets them pay less royalties or whatever.
Yeah, so much of I was so raised by TV that I have so many old commercials that are stuck in your head. I mean, that's what they're supposed to do, I guess. But
I mean, you would know. This is your area.
I know. I mean, that's kind of one of the reasons I went into marketing, because I was like, hey, I watch a lot of commercials. I know what they're doing. I get what they're trying to do. This is easy.
Join them. You can't beat them.
Now, I want to join the evil people.
Yeah. All right. Now we're much closer to the 12
we're done.
mark,
We're done.
So, thanks for listening to episode 2 of the unnamed podcast for now with Regal and swimfan. We'll see you next time.
See ya.